Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. Today we're taking a look at Southern Miss Golden Eagles, who are coming off a 3-9 season and just wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 6th. We have a special guest joining us today. Welcome to the show, Dima Mixon, a beat writer for the student Printz and Big Gold Nation. He can be found at Dima_Mixon on X. Welcome, Dima.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into covering the Southern Miss Golden Eagles?
Yeah, sure. So it's my third year doing this, third year on the beat for Southern Miss football, pretty much every sport, honestly. And got involved. I knew the guy. I knew the previous boss here, the student Printz, before I came to college. So kind of got connected with him through that. And then he brought me on and said I'd be a great writer for them and sports writer for them. So kind of knew him, and it's kind of blown up since then. As far as our coverage for Southern Miss sports, and so I just keep going, and fixing to be on my fourth football season this fall, so just continually rolling, I guess.
Speaking of football, they got Chip Long coming in as the new offensive coordinator. What kind of changes can we expect with the style of offense and play calling this coming season?
Yeah, I mean, well, you have to first have a view of what the offense has been like the past few seasons to understand the transformation. You get Will Hall, who's the head coach, coming in to Southern Miss, and 2021 was his first year. They go through like 10 to 15 quarterbacks in his first year because every single quarterback they'd throw out there would get hurt. So then they eventually just went to Frank Gore Jr. playing quarterback, and they called it the Superback. And so it was never really a serious offense. And then in 2022, you had a quarterback in Ty Keys who gets hurt in the second game. And then you got, Trey Lowe, who's trying to kind of find his way. And he does fine, but he's not really the quarterback that you would think you'd have on a team that went to a bowl game and won a bowl game. And then last year, they get a transfer from Billy Wiles in from Clemson. They get a transfer in Holman Edwards from Houston. And they think that, they're going to be really good there. And they weren't good at the quarterback position. They really lacked the offensive style. Excuse me. Eventually went to freshman Ethan Crawford towards the latter part of the season. And he's obviously in line for the starting job this year. But for the most part, Will Hall has been calling the plays and been sort of the offensive coordinator for Southern Miss, and he stepped back from that role in the middle of the offseason. I mean, the middle of the season last year, and so it was pretty much expected that they would have a different person calling the plays, a different person running the offense. So they bring in Chip Long, and as far as what's going to be different, I think he's going to utilize the tight ends probably a lot more than Southern Miss fans have seen in the past. You're going to have a lot of swing passes, a lot of screen passes, some downfield shots, but a lot of I would say more Power 5 style approach to the offense. He has a Notre Dame background actually, so I think you're going to see a lot of things like that, and that's what we've seen in the spring. We've seen a lot of those screens. We've seen a lot of those. Those counter plays where you're bringing the right tackle all the way over to the left tackle and kind of that bigger set, almost like a Michigan form run game. Very, very Power 5 oriented offense that I think Southern Miss fans haven't seen over the past couple of years.
So staying with the offensive side, you talked about Billy Wiles coming over in the transfer portal. And, they get another quarterback in the transfer portal and bringing over Tate Rodemaker from Florida State. How did this competition shake out during the spring with, you talked about I think he was a true freshman, might have been a redshirt freshman, Ethan Crawford.
Yeah, and you throw in Billy Wiles in there throughout the spring, and you throw in the freshman they got from MRA, which is Madison Ridgeland Academy here in Mississippi, very talented freshman in John White. So you basically had a four-way quarterback battle here in the spring until the day after spring training finished, when Billy Wiles announced he's going to be in the transfer portal. So that kind of brought the quarterback position back down to a three-way race. And I'm telling you, I mean, if I had to pick, I would say Ethan Crawford probably came out of the spring camp as far as maybe you would say the front runner. But I mean, I still think it's very much anyone's job. I mean, John White is probably the best freshman quarterback that they've gotten in here in a long time. I mean, he's a very talented dual threat guy, can pin place the ball. A lot of people remember him in Mississippi for coming down to Oak Grove, which is a public school, and Madison Ridgeland Academy, not a public school. Big for them to come to a game like that. Oak Grove, won the state high school tournament, states tournament, state championship here in Mississippi. They went down to Oak Grove in their home stadium and basically came a 2-point conversion away from beating them. And John White did that. And Will Hall was on the field. I was standing actually next to Will Hall on the field, and he was watching his quarterback recruit almost beat Oak Grove. So I think John White has a good chance. You mentioned Tate Rodemaker. I mean, it's a Power 5 guy. I mean, they try to get Power 5 guys in. You look at Billy Wiles, but this is a guy who actually has playing experience, unlike Billy Wiles does. Rodemaker starting in that Florida game. He started in several games for Florida State last year, who was by all means in very much a position to compete for a college football national championship. Obviously, he wasn't starting over Jordan Travis, but after Jordan Travis came out, I mean, he was in there. So he has real game experience. And then, like you said, Ethan Crawford. I mean, this is a guy who can run. I think he just brings such a different element because of his legs. He has a power arm, probably the best arm out of the three of them. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think you have a definite starter, obviously. And fall camp, somebody's going to have to take reins. But if I had to guess someone who's leading coming out of spring, I would say Ethan Crawford probably. But you don't want to say that if you're Will Hall, because you don't want anybody to transfer out, obviously.
Absolutely. In this day and age, for sure.
Yeah, we are recording this here on Monday, April 15th. We got the portal opening up, and we got a 2-week span where everyone's trying to hold on to everybody and maybe get some positions that they need. So after Crawford, if that's where you think they currently sit, who do you think then is 2 and 3?
Well, I don't think Crawford is really that much in front, but if I had to name a 2 and 3, I'd say you got to put Tate Rodemaker in there at 2, just because of his experience, and John White at 3. And the only reason I say that, I mean, John White's a true freshman, and I don't really know how many Southern Miss fans really want another true freshman going out there and taking snaps in a year where Will Hall has to get it done. I mean, he has to start winning in this program. 4th year, all he's talked about is winning. And he knows it. He said it. He said he's proud of the way they built it. He's proud of the way they've recruited, but he knows it's time to win. And so I think you got to pick the quarterback who's going to best position you to win games. And maybe that is Rodemaker even over Crawford. Or maybe they could use Crawford still in the game. He's just not the quarterback one. But I would say I would be very surprised if John White was the starting quarterback on day one. It could change in the middle of the season, but against Kentucky on the road, I'd say you got to go most likely with Rodemaker or Ethan Crawford.
Moving on to the running back room, where they lose longtime stalwart Frank Gore Jr. off to the NFL, but you do return Rodriguez Clark and Kenyon Clay. How did that running back room look in the spring?
Well, I mean, they call him Dreek Clark here at Southern Miss. That guy is ginormous. He's definitely going to be your all-purpose back for basically every down. And like you mentioned, Kenyon Clay, he's kind of that secondary back. But Dreek Clark, I wouldn't say – I mean, obviously you lose Frank Gore Jr., who's generational talent. But, I mean, I don't think that it's like a massive drop-off to Dreek Clark. Dreek Clark is big. He can get up and down the field. I compare him to a bowling ball, where he's just that muscular, and if he's getting tackled in the backfield, he's falling forward for 2 or 3 yards. He's not going to take tackles for loss. And then if he gets that burst of speed, you can forget it. So he's just a big back, and you really question not necessarily about the running back room, but if the offensive line can open up holes for him.
How did so you had a true freshman there that I was pretty excited about, early enrollee, and Jalen Washington. How did he look this spring, and what kind of role can we expect for him, you think, in 2024?
Yeah, he looked great in the spring. Him and JQ Gray. JQ, they call him Bolt. JQ Gray, he's another one of those younger running backs. Yeah, I mean, like you said, Jalen Washington looked very well, good in spring. Actually, in the first spring practice, he had all the touchdowns. Nobody else had a touchdown other than him. He had I think he had 3 that day. So gets a good up and down back. As far as how you can see his role in the 2024 season, I mean, you could see him potentially come in at a couple of spots. But I don't think he's going to have a central role in the offense unless obviously one of the other two goes down.
I think I saw something, or I don't believe it's something that you wrote. I think it was something from the local newspaper guy, but they predicted Washington kind of like number 3 on the depth chart behind Clark and Clay, and I mean that was really positive news, I thought. But that running back room definitely needs some depth. So kind of interesting to hear that you have the 2 young guys there look pretty good in the spring.
No, I was just going to comment. Yeah, that's what I would have it too. Probably Jalen Washington at that 3, JQ Gray at that 4. And again, they can kind of go in and out of that. You can have a Rodriguez Clark getting you those, Drew Clark getting you those 5-6 yards. Then if you need that 1 yard kind of burst to the edge, you bring in JQ Gray on a jet sweep or Jalen Washington on a halfback dive or something like that.
And just for our listeners, I did look up Drake Clark, 5'10", 200 pounds. I know sometimes the schools maybe fudge the numbers a little bit. Does that sound about right? Does he look all of 200 pounds and 5'10"?
Yeah.
Okay.
No doubt.
All right.
I'm telling you, he legitimately looks like a bowling ball. I mean, he's so hard to bring down. It's all muscle. And I would get out of the way. I wouldn't try to tackle him.
All right. The wide receiver room took a hit this offseason between graduation and the transfer, losing 3 of their top 4 wide receivers, and Ty Mims being one of the lone returnees. How did the wide receiver room look this spring, and who stood out?
Yeah, I mean that's a room that you're really questioning about what they can do with that room because you lost a lot of your talent there. You bring back Ty Mims, as you said. He's kind of your slot receiver, and they used him a lot in the spring. He actually sat out for I think the first week or so of spring, so they didn't or a week in spring. So he was out for a while. He got us a chance to see some of those other players. A player that I would mention would be J.J. Butler. He's kind of their bigger guy on the outside, trying to replace Ja'Karius Caston. He's a transfer, or rather, he's a freshman. Excuse me. He's not the transfer. Larry Simmons is the transfer from Ole Miss, but he's the freshman. Will Hall still wants to see him kind of come into that wide receiver role on the outside. He's big, he's tall, he gets good separation, but he hasn't been able to find that ball skills or the run after catch yet that they want to see throughout the season. Then all the other guys I mentioned, Larry Simmons, they all looked decent, but again, it's still spring. It's really hard to take a lot from the wide receivers in spring because also you have to remember too that the defensive backfield for the defense was very depleted this spring. Most of the starters sat out, so you're not really getting good analytical data against probably one of the better secondaries in the Sun Belt with those wide receivers. So I think you're going to see a lot. You're going to have a lot of those answers in the fall, I think, more so than this spring.
Earlier, you mentioned, you thought that the tight end would be used more than what we have seen in the past. And we know they lose Cole Cavallo off to graduation. Was there a tight end that kind of stood out in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, they got the transfer in, or rather the freshman in that they really wanted in the recruiting portal. He's a big guy. I'm just drawing blank on his name. But he's a big guy there at the tight end space. I think it's another part of the offense where they really hope that they're going to be good enough. But again, like you said, they're losing so much talent on those skill players that a lot of people are questioning this offense and how good they can be come time to play some football in the fall.
The offensive line will need to be rebuilt after losing its top 4 offensive linemen from a year ago in terms of snaps. How did that group look this spring?
Yeah, they got some work to do in the offensive line, and they had their moments. They had certain moments where they looked, decent. But the offensive line to me is one of the outside the wide receiver room is the biggest question mark because it's what's really held them back over the last 2 years. I think of last year. I mean, every single time Billy Wiles would take a snap, there'd be somebody in his face, and I saw a lot of that in the spring. And there were days where the offensive line looked good, but they're going to have to get exceptionally better. They are still pretty young at that spot. So they hope that some of that experience from last year can carry over to this season and see. I do think they're going to be better on the offensive line last year, but I don't think they're going to be like tremendously good. But I think the good thing for the offensive line is that they're facing probably one of the best group of 5 defensive lines in the country that Southern Miss has. It's definitely the strength of the team. So to face that every single day in practice is nothing but beneficiary to the offensive line. And that's something that Hall said when I asked him about it 2 or 3 weeks ago. He said it's just huge that the offensive line gets to face that kind of defensive presence on the defensive line for the better half of spring and then obviously all of fall camp.
Following back up on the tight end, was that Teron Bedford that who you were talking about?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
So he's just for people listening. He's a enrollee 6'4", 255 per I think 24/7 Sports. So
yeah, early enrollee. Yeah.
If you had to pick one player on this offense to kind of have a breakout type season, who would that be?
I would say Dree Clark because he was really held back because of Frank Gore Jr. Of what he could really do on the running back room. I think he's in prime time position to have a standout role on the offense, especially with how much Chip Long likes to run the ball. He came in saying he's going to want to run the ball. He came in saying that's going to be a focus, and I think he's going to have a lot of opportunity, and I think he could have a very big season. It's again whether or not the offensive line can block for him, and if they can, and he gets into that second level, he could have a really big year.
With Clay Bignell coming over as the defensive coordinator, what changes do you think we can expect to see in terms of the defensive style and personnel based defensive alignment on the field here?
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be like significant changes from Dan O'Brien last season. Now, Bignell obviously has a different scheme than Dan O'Brien did last season. He plays more attack. He plays more, fly to the ball. As every defensive player that we talk to, they say all we do is fly to the ball, and it's true. That's literally all. When somebody catches the ball, you have about 5 Golden Eagle defenders around them. So they fly to the ball. They're aggressive. They try to rip the ball out to get turnovers. They try to do all those things, and as far as the defensive scheme, though, I don't think you're going to see a significant defensive scheme. Some changes. They did move Dylan Lawrence down to kind of a nickel spot there at the defense. So he was a free safety, very big, athletic free safety. If I had that many abs, I'd probably be like a whatever it's called, person that posts my abs on Instagram. But
you'd be an underwear model.
Underwear model, yes. Dima Mixon, underwear model. Yeah, this would be a different podcast. But yeah, he has a huge 6-8 pack or whatever it is, maybe even 12. And he always rolls his shirt up to show it off because who wouldn't? But he's a big guy, and they kind of moved him down, and he's just – and that's one way they changed. And again, we haven't really seen the full potential of the Bignell defense because most of the secondary was out this spring. And I think we're going to see really what they can be come fall camp when they start getting those guys back. Thankfully, they were all here in the spring, so they were able to hear the install of his defense. They just weren't really able to practice it. But when you think about what he has on the defensive line and what he has on the in the secondary, really the linebacker position is somewhere where I think is going to be something to watch because of what they lost there in Hayes Maples, Avery Hobbs, and all the players they lost on that side of the ball, or that position room on the defense. But other than that, I don't think you're going to see a lot of changes from Dan O'Brien, but the changes you do see will be net positive, I think.
That's a great segue to our next question and the linebackers. They lose, just from a tackle perspective, they lose 8 of their top 11 tacklers from last year, including the top 3 linebackers. Hayes Maples was there. I don't know. It seems like he was there forever. It was a great middle linebacker for them. Kind of, how did they retool that linebacker room in the spring? How'd they look, and did anyone stand out?
Well, they retooled it through recruiting. I don't think they brought any linebacker transfers over on the top of my head.
I don't think so either.
But yeah, so I believe all of them are recruits, and all of them played behind Hayes Maples and Avery Hobbs. I mean, they're not like young there. So it's just the playing experience that we really don't know. I mean, in the spring they looked okay. I don't think really anybody specifically stood out as far as like they looked great. It's an area where they're still going to have to improve. I think the biggest thing is on the coverage busts or whatever it was in certain points in practice. It wasn't just bad reads or whatever by the linebackers. It was just good scheming by the offense. So I think that's something that Will Hall's happy about, and definitely Bignell is. But thankfully, I think most of them have at least experienced a part of this program, and we'll see what they can do. Though I'm not as worried at the linebacker position as probably a lot of people are, because it is the vocal point of the offense. But I really like the fact that they brought Dylan Lawrence down there to kind of help him out in communication and stuff, as him being more of a nickel player now. So I'm not overly worried about it, but we'll see what happens.
Was there anyone that kind of stood out to kind of take over that Hayes Maples role, or they're still kind of figuring that out?
Again, not on the top of my mind. I mean, you had a couple players who played there, but I mean that's a position battle that's still up for grabs. They don't really know who's going to start there. They don't really know who's going to start on that side on the linebacker
Gotcha.
role. So, but again, I think that's a question to be answered in the fall.
Okay.
Obviously, but as far as more in like who's going to stand out there, who are really watching, most of spring you're watching. We have quarterback battles and secondary and all that stuff. So, but linebacker is still most of them very important. So,
well, the defensive line fared pretty good in getting some guys back. We got Booth and Williams and Lewis coming back. What can you tell us about the defensive line and how they performed this spring?
I mean, they're animals. It is very hard to run the ball on them. They get in the backfield. I think Jalen Williams is probably the best defensive lineman in the whole group of five. He is so big. He is strong. He's almost impossible to tackle. Him and Jaleel Clemens, honestly. And Jaleel Clemens is kind of in that linebacker room. But Jalen Williams, like you mentioned Kristen Booth and Broderius Lewis. Armandus Cooley as well. Kind of getting him back after injuries. He looked pretty good in the spring. And they're animals. It's definitely the strongest part of the defense. And it was very adamant in the spring that it's going to be hard to run on them and hard to block them in pass protection.
Earlier, you were mentioning the defensive backfield and how they look pretty strong in the spring as well. And they do lose second leading tackler, safety Jay Stanley, and cornerback Markel McLaurin. What can you tell us about those guys and kind of who stood out for them?
Well, again, the secondary was kind of depleted in the spring because most of them are injured. Most of them didn't play. So it was kind of like, oh, who's going to be the twos? Because you had your guys in the backfield, your Michael Caraway Juniors and your, all those players in the. I always draw blanks on these shows, but all those players in the secondary who have, been a part of this program. They're 3 and 4 year players. They just weren't available in the spring, so it was really more of a question of who's going to play the back end of them. And Bignell told us that he is so happy that all these secondary players have gotten reps, significant reps, honestly, in these spring practices. MJ Daniels, I mean, another guy is going to be just a ginormous piece for them. The transfer from Ole Miss, he might be the best player in the secondary, and he didn't play but a couple of snaps this spring. So it'll be really awesome to see them all in the fall and see what this defense can be. Because again, I think it's going to be, if not the best, one of the best defenses in the whole group of five, and 100% on the line for the best defenses in the Sun Belt.
So if you were to pick one defensive player to have a breakout type season here in 2024, who would you pick for that?
I'm going to say Jaleel Clemens. I think legitimately every single play he was involved in, he was in the backfield, and he's actually put on some weight, some muscle, to kind of give him more strength than he's had in recent years. And I think he's going to be really, really good for Southern Miss this season. I would say, honestly, I could name several Southern Miss players who could be potential for that role, but I'd say Jaleel Clemens as far as now.
In a recent article about G5 college football that was written by Ross Dellinger, a writer for Yahoo Sports, he talked a lot with Will Hall, and he wrote about how Coach Hall, most of his time is consumed with other things other than coaching. He was quoted as saying, I do zero football anymore, zero football in my life right now. I do culture and recruiting. And it seems like this, this isn't just a kind of a thing at Southern Miss. This is kind of a thing at, all of college football now with all the things going on between the portal, player retention, NIL, all that stuff. Are they doing anything to kind of help him from a personnel standpoint, like adding staff to try to kind of take over that general manager type role so he can do more football, or kind of what are they doing there?
Well, I think that article was actually before spring training started. So I think he wasn't really active in their pre-spring workouts. But I mean, during spring, he was very involved in the football aspect of coaching. But as far as getting a general manager for those things, I don't think so. I think Will wants to do it. Like I think that's the point, that he wants to connect with people in this community, and to promote the NIL collective at Southern Miss. And I don't think he would be okay with letting other people do it, because that's the kind of guy he is. Like he wants to say it to their face. He doesn't want it to be an email. He doesn't want it to be a social media post. He wants to go to the business, shake hands with the guy, and say, give him a sales pitch on donating to the collective. And I think it's great. But I do think that article, though, was written, and I could be wrong, but I think it was written before spring started. So
yeah, I think it was like late January, early February, somewhere around there.
Yeah, so I think the only reason he was saying that, because you have that dead period before spring starts. You don't really do much as a head coach, but after spring, he said, "Well, now I'm going back to raising money." He said that in the press conference. He said we're gonna work out tomorrow, and then I'm going to raise money. So, I think he loves doing it. I think and he's told me, he's told us that that it's something that he wants to do, and it's not something that he takes for granted.
So with the transfer portal and NIL becoming more prominent here in college football and college sports in general, what impacts have you seen that it has had for Southern Miss in regards to recruiting or player retention?
Well, definitely recruiting. I mean, you think about the quarterbacks they've gotten in here to the transfer portal, and just adding some other talent on other areas where they needed it. But I would say 100% for the recruiting. As far as player retention, I mean, outside of Billy Wiles entering the transfer portal last week, I mean, there's not been a lot of Southern Miss players that have entered the transfer portal over at least in the Will Hall era. So I think him with player retention has been positive. It's been really good. And I think it's more mainly because he's honest with the players who want to transfer. But I mean, as far as how it's impacted Southern Miss, I mean, there hasn't been like a transfer player outside of maybe a Dylan Lawrence who's been like a central part of Southern Miss sports so far. I think that will change this year just because of Tate Rodemaker, but but we'll see. We'll see what happens. I do think they will look to the transfer portal in this opening to maybe add a wide receiver, or maybe add somebody on the offensive line who has a little more experience. I think they have 2 scholarships to give, so we'll see. But Maybe just one. Well, maybe with Billy Wiles transferring. I don't know. I don't know how that works. But I know that they have a handful of scholarships still to give, and they might look in the portal to try to add some depth and to try to add some talent, maybe on the outside for wide receiver or in the inside on the offensive line. Maybe even a linebacker too.
Would it kind of leads into our next question? Would you say the offensive line and the receivers are kind of the most, I guess, after spring practice, the groups that might be the most concerning?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would definitely put wide receivers number one, because it's such a central element to offense. And you really, you came into 2 years ago, you had Jason Brownlee, who's playing for the Jets now. I mean, he was a guy who could take over a game for you if you needed to. Last year, you had, Jacarius Caston there. You had Ty Mims, Brandon Hayes. He didn't play a lot, but you even had your tight ends in Cole Cavallo and whoever it was. And you had at least somebody who could catch the ball. This season, there's not a guy outside of Ty Mims, and we haven't mentioned Chandler Pittman on the show yet, but Chandler Pittman's another guy who Mike could develop into a slot receiver type role for them. Very fast and athletic super back, as they call him, because they really haven't found a role for him over his years here at Southern Miss. Maybe I think that could develop into maybe a different style running back or slot wide receiver. But they don't have a guy right now who I could say on the wide receiver room who would take over a game as far as with his size and his speed. And they've had that at Southern Miss over the past couple of years, despite their offensive woes with Jacarius Caston or Jason Brownlee, or if you go back several years ago, you had several players who were, Alan Zay Staggers in 2016, and a lot of players who could take over games if they needed to. So they don't have that this year. And on the offensive line, I mean, they're all guys who've played Southern Miss offensive line before, and everybody's seen their struggles, and it's going to be on them to try to change that struggle. So if I had to say, those two rooms will definitely be the most concerning. I think you throw the linebackers in there as well. But again, I'm not as concerned about the linebackers as I am wide receiver and O-line.
And you talked a little bit about the strength and being the defensive line and the secondary. Which one do you think would be the number one strength?
Outside of the defensive line and secondary?
Just no between those two.
Oh, defensive line, 100%.
Defensive. Okay.
They're so big, they're so strong, they're so physical. It's definitely the best defensive line in the Sun Belt. I would probably argue they're up there in the best defensive line in the group of five.
How, at the end of 2024, the season's over, you look back on it and you say this season was a success. What has to happen? What do they have to do?
Well, they got to win. And I know that's kind of cliche, but this is not a season to piddle around. The pressure is on Will Hall, I would say, and I love the guy, obviously. But I would say his seat is very, very warm this year, I would say, just because of his contract expires this year. There's a lot more ways for them to move on from him if something doesn't go right, especially since he's now in his fourth year. So the pressure's on for him to win. I would say success would be definitely a bowl game, a bowl victory. But I would say if you're not at least in position to potentially win your division, I would say that, I mean, if you can get in some kind of position where, like, they haven't played meaningful football past October in the past few seasons outside of the bowl season the last year. But I mean, you look at 2020 and 2021 and 2023, all those seasons, the season was over in October because they couldn't reach a bowl game. They're just playing almost meaningless football the last few games of the season. So I would say the success for me would be to win, obviously, but be playing meaningful football in November where you don't have a crowd of 16,000 for your senior day or whatever, So the schedule is very tough this year, so I don't know, but we'll see. It's still kind of early for me to – I would really want to see – I would be able to answer that question probably better after what they do in the transfer portal. If they can maybe add a wide receiver, maybe so. I don't know. But I would say success is definitely a bowl game, obviously. I think that would be okay for Southern Miss fans. To win 7 games would be really good. especially with this roster. I mean, this roster is very, very strong as far as you feel like you can get the 7 wins with this roster. And if you can't, something's really just wrong with the program, I guess.
Well, we'll make sure to circle back with you here before the start of the season and either get you on again or talk and, let our, tweet it out from our account of the thoughts here. But is there anything else that you want to share or think that we should know about Southern Miss football here in 2024?
I mean, it's just exciting. I mean, I feel like every year when we think about football season, like we just ended, but then it comes back so soon. So, football season's right around the corner. And Southern Miss football, I would say if you're a Sun Belt watcher and a Sun Belt team who kind of disregards them, I'd say don't disregard them this year because they have a very strong team with the right coaching, with the right wins, they could be right there for a Sun Belt championship. I wouldn't doubt it.
Well, we thank you for your time, Dima, and maybe we'll talk back to you again in the fall.
Yeah, anytime.